welcome to The Smoke Break. I'm your host, Joel Pal Zane, here with Zoe Schwartz.
Hello.
Daisy Claire.
Hi.
And Taylor Barrett.
Hi.
Daisy is a fellow comedian. We appreciate you being here today, Daisy.
Yeah. I'm so excited to talk to you, even though I cut you off during that sentence. But I just want to get this disclaimer out. We work in the field of mental health, but do not claim to be professionals within this space. Our intention is to have conversations around lived experience, and as a result, we may not always agree with everything our guests say, but we do intend to hold space for open conversations and learning from one another. Daisy, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. It's a good day.
Yeah, it is a nice day. So the topic you wanted to bring to us this week was autistic masking.
Yeah. I think that this was a topic that I chose because it's something that I've recently started talking a little bit more about on stage.
Okay.
And I think that it's one of the bigger parts of my own personal lived experience.
Sure.
But yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about my autism diagnosis, how I received it, and how autistic masking in particular has been something that's impacted my life.
Sure.
Just generally, yeah.
Okay, so let's start with getting diagnosed. How was that process?
It was really interesting because I have seen mental health professionals since I was a kid, basically,
Okay.
which is actually a pretty common experience for girls in particular, who were not diagnosed as kids, is
Right.
that it's recognized early on, there's something going on with you as a kid. But unfortunately, just when I was a child, there was not a lot of research for people who weren't specifically white, assigned male at birth people.
Right.
So I ended up getting diagnosed during the pandemic, actually, when I think I was 23 or 24.
Okay, so a later diagnosis.
Yeah. It was a really interesting process because a lot of stuff that I had been diagnosed with before was chronic social anxiety, persistent depression. And I finally started seeing evidence and studies and research about it just before the pandemic started, so 2019. And I kind of had this internal thing where I was oh, I'm 99.999% sure that this is the case.
Yeah.
But I don't want to talk to anybody about this until I am absolutely 100% certain.
Yeah. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense because I think we might recognize something with us as off, but it's it's a little bit harder. Somebody was telling me recently that they'd been experiencing paranoia, but it's who do you talk to when you don't know who you can trust? You know what I mean?
And it's also, I think that we culturally kind of have started to open the door to have conversations about mental health things.
Right.
But as soon as it's stuff that starts really significantly impacting your own personal or the people around you's physical health and safety, it becomes a lot more taboo.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was I don't want to come to other people about this until I am 100% certain. So I did about 8 or 9 months of pretty intensive research about this topic before I started coming to I think it was my partner at the time who I talked to about it first.
Right.
And then my mom and my family. But I, at that point, had been downloading scientific journal articles from PhDs and getting really, really into the actual data. I learned to read certain types of graphs. I was doing really, really intensive research about it just because I wanted to be 100% sure before I...
That became your new hyper-focus. You're just
Exactly.
I'm going to hyper-focus.
I feel like that should be the test. Is you did all this research and learn how to read graphs. It's yeah, okay, probably.
Well, and so after I told the people around me, I waited another 6 months or so to kind of decide whether I wanted to get professionally diagnosed.
Sure.
And I ended up doing it because I was I think that I'm going to need accommodations to work in a workplace full time.
Yeah.
I don't see a possibility of me doing that without them knowing that there's something going on with me. And so when I saw the clinician for the first time, I was that one of the first questions that they ask you as an adult getting diagnosed is why do you think you're autistic? And I was here's the huge binder of research that I've done.
Yeah.
Here are all of the double-blind studies. I've categorized them alphabetically.
That's funny.
And so within the first session, they were okay, it's not a question of if you're autistic. It's a question of what level of autism you have.
Yeah.
And what the impact of you not being diagnosed for like 20 years has been.
Yeah, definitely.
Because the average age of diagnosis historically has been between the ages of like 3 and 8. So the idea of getting diagnosed at 23, like there's a lot of years and years of like psychological impact that happen when people are treating your brain as though it works in a way that it absolutely does not work.
Yeah, no,
in that way.
I think that's a really good point to like bring up, is just that, like, you know, I think accommodations kind of do need to be made. You know, it's like bipolar. Like, I notify people that, like, if you see me in a bad mood, it's not because of something you did. You know what I mean? It's like, I need you to understand that, like, I have mood swings. They're not always impacted by people, but like, the accommodation of understanding that this is something that I'm working with and working through is like, it makes it possible to, you know, be a part of society and community.
Yeah.
It gives you like a little bit of a roadmap on how to like continue operating. It's like now you know what you're working with. Now you know what you're like, what your range of comfortability. I mean, I guess you probably already knew what your range of comfortability was, but it just like it removes the curtain and you kind of like see behind the scenes a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
You can really understand what's going on with you and how you have just like more answers and you know how to move forward a little more effectively.
Yeah. I can relate too, because I have ADHD, and like I got diagnosed when I was probably like 18 or 19, but I didn't take it seriously. So I really like officially like where I took it seriously and believed it 100%. Got like in the last like 5 years or maybe 6 tops. And yeah, I definitely, the thing you said about like the way that like the impact of having people not understand the way that your brain works repeatedly over and over, like the school system like caused a lot of trauma for me.
It does.
And it affected my self-worth a lot. And I've heard that's a really common thing with people with neurodivergence, is like, because we feel like we're getting the feedback that we're doing something wrong all the time, it can cause like things like rejection sensitivity and all that. And like, and then it makes you like really nervous to try new things or to put yourself out there, because the fear of feeling wrong again is like so intense. I don't know if that's relatable for you at
that's
all,
I mean, that's 100% it. Honestly, you put it into words so well, because for me, like, that was the feedback that I started getting on reading social cues, starting when you're supposed to start reading social cues, which is like as a toddler. You're, you know, like 2 or 3 that you're supposed to start doing things like giving eye contact, proactively seeking social interaction. And when your kid doesn't do that and you're not super aware of why your kid's not doing that, and then there's a really strong social expectation, especially for like people who are assigned female at birth, for girls to be like really friendly starting when they're kids. When you don't meet that expectation, you a lot of times get the feedback that like you're doing something wrong.
You're standoffish, you're shy, you're, you know.
And
or
so
even
like
confrontational.
Confrontational is another one. Like, I was told a lot as a kid that I was bossy, which is a really common experience for like neurodivergent femmes, is just like you get the feedback a lot of like, let the other people have a turn, stop being bossy, quiet down. And so I like from a really early age was like, okay, so when I try and like do that, I'm getting really bad social feedback. I need to try and figure out how other people are behaving in a way that they're getting positive feedback and start trying to emulate that.
So is that where some of the masking and stuff started coming from?
And so like that's kind of the root cause of what masking is. Like, I think that there are people define it a little differently depending on their own experiences, but like kind of the broadly accepted like definition of masking is like modulating and changing your physical interactions with people, and also the way in which you speak, your cadence, the topics that you choose to speak about. You like filter yourself.
I'm masking. Okay, cool. All right.
and that's the thing, is that it's a really common experience across different neurodivergences. Like, I think that it is talked about a lot or is associated the most with autism.
Definitely.
But I think that any time that you're experiencing like mental health things that aren't considered like normative, you do a lot to try and make up for it. Because you are very much punished socially for not meeting those expectations.
Well, and I think that's a good way of like putting that, is that like you are punished socially. It's just like, because there is such an expectation of like, everybody saw this thing and then knew to do that thing. Why didn't you also do that? And it's like, that's an unfair expectation for somebody who like, with a little bit of, you know, explanation or like helping that person understand why this is the way this, you know, we do this, you know, but it's like, you just end up like adapting all of these things that you're like, I think this is protecting me. I think this makes me accepted, therefore worthy of love, therefore a part of community. And
it's like a whole new thing to learn, you know, with like neurodivergency and like autism specifically. It makes education, like the standardized education process, like really difficult for a lot of people. It was so difficult for me. And like the most common thing that drove me up a wall was like, you're not living up to your full potential. That shit drove me nuts. I could not, because it's like if you see that in me, that like obviously there's something there that should be.
Yeah, it's not my fault that like that's happening. You're just blaming me and not giving me a solution.
For not just like playing the game. It always felt like they just wanted me to like just play the game, and that was so unnerving, just uncomfortable to feel like I was having to like peel myself away from my own needs and my own process of learning and understanding things to like to fit into this like just this very standardized version of what they thought should happen.
Well, and like we've talked a little bit about like, well, I know you've expressed like maybe thinking that you might be autistic.
Definitely.
Yeah. So like what's been your experience of being like the world has these expectations of me, and I feel like because I'm not meeting them, I'm not obtaining the same things.
It's been like a weird uphill battle to kind of like hit that point of acceptance where it's like this is just kind of like how the world works, and it doesn't mean that there's anything necessarily wrong with me, but there is like a little bit of a game you kind of have to play to like to operate in the real world. And like I fought that for so long.
I've seen you very adverse to bosses.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's so real. It's a thing where a lot of autistic people, and that's been my experience, is hierarchy in particular is like,
because it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. And there are people who are within a hierarchical structure who are above me who've really earned my respect. And I'm like, you've earned your place here. But it's kind of on everyone else to prove that they're in the position they're supposed to be in.
Absolutely. I think a boss, like they should regularly remind you, not like in an asshole or like overly assertive, problematic way, but like they should constantly do things that remind you why they're in the position that they're in. Where like when I see a good boss operate in a good way, like our boss, when I see our boss do shit, I'm like, oh yeah, that's why she's the fucking boss. Like she gets it. She's been through all of it. She knows what the fuck she's talking about. Yeah, and I have so much respect for her, and she consistently reinforces that versus other bosses that I'm just like, how the fuck did you get here? How like
that's so real.
Did you just put your time in and then like you weaseled your way up a notch for me?
Well, I guess I'm just kind of curious. Like it sounds like in both of those situations that like if there is a sense of like an earned trust, like you're for that, but the societal like you're a boss, therefore you get respect, you're older, therefore you get respect, you just always rebelled against.
I don't vibe with that at all.
That makes sense to me. I heard that like I don't know if it applies to like all like a general statement about neurodivergent people, or if it was just about, I think it was just about ADHD, but they were saying that people with ADHD often have a strong sense of injustice and justice. And I've always felt that way. Like, this isn't fair. Like, and I think the hierarchy isn't fair. So that's why we feel like, what the fuck? I don't like this. This doesn't make sense. You didn't earn this authority over me. You know what I mean?
I think a large part of it for me was like the order of operations, where it's like, okay, because this person is my boss, I have to respect them. That doesn't make sense to me. But like if they're doing things that make me feel like they are in a position of like they earned a position of authority, that makes sense, and they're constantly like helping me from a position of authority and offering areas of, I guess help is just the best word I can think of, but just like then that respect comes with it, and in the acknowledgement of the position they're in comes after that, not just okay, well they're here so I have to treat them.
It's like more logical versus like just adhering to people's the power.
You have this title, therefore I treat you like this. Okay.
I mean,
I felt that way.
It's quite interesting that we actually bring up the hierarchy thing, because I think that's actually a really important secondary thing that contributed to me starting to mask at a really young age. Is that like when I was young, I was like, well, why are you in charge? Because kids have like no rights in our society. The way that we treat kids culturally is pretty gross. And I'm glad that people have kind of started to reconsider that recently in recent years with like certain forms of teaching and like gentle parenting. But like I, as a kid, constantly questioned why the adults around me were in positions of power, and they hated that. I was such a goody two-shoes, but every time I was ever sent to the principal's office as a kid was because I was like, I think you're wrong, teacher, about like a fact that they said or about a decision they made.
Or like an interaction they had with a different student even.
Yeah. And if you're, I was consistently like shut down for being myself and for questioning other people. And so I was like, those are the two things that I need to stop doing outwardly. I need to figure out inward ways of being able to like release this energy without going crazy. And so I actually got really into writing and really into like doing art and stuff like that. But it was because I felt like externally in my social life, I wasn't able to do either one of those things without people being like, stop being weird. And
Want to be weird.
Yeah.
Weird is good.
And I think that like as that develops like through childhood and then you become an adult and no one has that presence of authority for
Right.
you, you're like, oh, what do I do now? Because I
Yeah.
kind of built all of my skills and like identity around processing this in a very private way.
Yeah. Definitely.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate you sharing your perspective on masking and like
Yeah.
your experience with that. And yeah, I appreciate both of you. All right, cool. We're gonna take a real quick break and we'll be right back with the smoke break. And welcome back to the smoke break. I'm your host, Joel Palzane, here with Zoe Schwartz,
Hello.
Daisy Claire,
Hi.
and Taylor Barrett.
Hey, it's me.
Yo, all right. So during this section, even though I just started off very happy, we're gonna talk about shame.
are.
Yeah, pew pew, shame.
Pew.
Shame's something that like I've experienced in the past, and it's something I'm always trying to navigate. I think it's especially difficult when the outside matches the inside, you know, because it's like sometimes I feel like we think bad things about ourselves, and then like the outside is like bad things, and you're like, oh, okay, this is harder to separate.
Like reinforces the shame.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think that a lot of experiencing shame is actually kind of trying to make the physical outsides match the insides
Mhm.
because cognitive dissonance is actually a really painful feeling to have. And
Drives me nuts.
sometimes when you're feeling shitty, you want to like reinforce that you are doing badly
Yeah.
because you're feeling shitty. It's almost like a self-regulatory behavior.
Yeah.
But the reason I wanted to talk about shame is because I think that like the primary driver of things like autistic masking and
Sure.
trying to like be as normal as possible, the primary thing that drives that is a sense of shame.
Yeah.
And it's the process of like learning to unmask and learning to kind of develop skills of like the person that you want to be and like communicate to others.
Mhm.
A large part of that is not just trying to figure out who you are. It's like fully deconstructing the feeling of shame and kind of learning to sit with it and process it in a healthy way.
Yeah, definitely.
Well,
definitely.
I think shame can definitely be used as like a learning tool for like your own behavior, and that's not to say that like I want people to experience shame. I want people to feel shameful, but like it's normal when you do something that you're not stoked about to like kind of feel a little bit of shame and then
Yeah.
want to like reevaluate it, whether that's to like have a better output or to avoid the shame. I think both are totally valid answers in that. And at least that's something that I've done a lot. Like if I feel weird about a situation, if I feel shameful, I try to like talk to myself about it and just like understand why that came about, how I can go about it better in the future. And it's sometimes it's helped more than other times, but it's something that's worth revisiting for me, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
I think of shame as like something, I mean, I don't think this necessarily applies to what you said, but in another way of thinking about shame, I think about shame as like, which does kind of apply to masking or does super apply to masking. It's like, I feel like it's imposed by the outside. Like, I feel like we're not born with shame.
Yeah.
It's imposed by like cultural norms and like systemic crap. And then like that same thing happened to me. And then I had all this like negative internal dialogue and beliefs about myself. And when I started to unpack all of that, I was like, oh, these are all messages that were sent to me about like what we're supposed to be like
Mm-hmm.
in order to be lovable, in order to be acceptable. And I thought I didn't fit into that. And then to come to find out that like these systems are all connected in this really intense way. Like it was a really big opening, like eye-opening experience for me to, and then I was like, oh, none of this shit is mine. Like this is all given to me. All
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
shame was
Shame that's given
me.
to you is
Yeah.
the like the fucked up part where
Yeah.
it's not your own, like I'm not stoked about this, it's other people's like
Yeah.
you should feel bad, you should
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, it's
that shit
different.
sucks.
It's different from guilt. It's different from
Yeah.
I mean that's a good point.
But I think that a lot of people have a really difficult time separating guilt, regret, and shame.
Yeah.
And because of that, when they're experiencing guilt, they automatically experience shame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And guilt can be a really productive emotion.
Absolutely.
I like before I started taking my mental health really seriously, I had a really hard time sustaining a lot of relationships, and I did and said kind of fucked up things.
Sure.
Which I think is a common experience for a lot of people who have mental health issues.
Right.
But like
Just people.
feeling, yeah, just people generally. I
People
mean,
say things
I
they
don't
don't
know
mean.
any 20-year-old who's not shitty. If you're watching this and you're 20 years old, be better.
Yeah. Be older.
Be older.
you got time to do it, but also hey.
Speaking of shame, shame on you.
Yeah.
No, I think that shame is one of those things that is imposed from the outside, and it's not something that you can create a productive relationship with.
Yeah.
Because the feeling is I am bad and I need to reinforce that. I need to make other people see how I am bad.
Yeah, and how I realize that I am bad.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too is that like oftentimes, like especially like, you know, when we're growing up, is that like shame is used as like a form of control, you know?
It very much is. And I think that any time that you occupy a marginalized identity, regardless of what it is, you experience shame in a very different way than the rest of the population, because you are very much encouraged to be one of the good ones. And there's like this really hard respectability politics that comes with it. Like my own personal experience with shame is like, it took me a long time to admit to other people in a serious way that like I can't work more than like 30 hours a week and I can't drive. When I try and drive, I get really bad panic attacks if I go above 45 miles an hour.
Right.
And I can't do that in Portland.
Right.
So it took like a while for me to like feel comfortable telling that to other people without it being a thing of other people being like, you're a loser without a car.
Yeah.
Because that was always the internal monologue that I had.
Right. I
know?
definitely think that like, yeah, some of like the shaming aspects of like, you know, you don't have this or you're not like this are the things that like keep us keeping that to ourselves.
Yeah, well, and for me, it was very much shame wrapped around like, oh, because I'm autistic, I actually am like disabled in a lot of ways.
Sure.
Because we live in a culture where you kind of have to work full time and have a car
And be
to
social.
like and be social and just have all of these specific skill sets that like some of those skill sets I have and other ones I don't. And it is hard admitting that like those are things that disable you. But also there's this idea of like making other people to be the bad guy in your mind. I think that shame really causes you to think of other people in the most like mean way possible. And you have to kind of remind yourself like it's kind of shitty to think that your loved ones or the people around you are going to judge you for the things you feel the most shame about.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that comes about too when it has happened, even like on a small scale, like shit with my grandparents that like I was primarily raised by my grandparents, and like there's a lot of shit that was just ingrained into their brain because of like the time period they grew up in. So talking to them about mental health was like it was an uphill battle that I still kind of avoid having because of like the shame that they're not even meaning to put on me, but just they're just like, oh, whatever, you're just lazy. And it's like, no, like you don't understand. Like I was catatonically fucking depressed, and like that's a legitimate issue. It's not that I'm lazy, you know what I mean? Like there's plenty of situations where I might have been, but like that was not the conversation I was having with them. And like that's and then that creates this other inner dialogue of like, what's the meanest thing this person could say to me? That's probably what they're going to say to me. And then you view that person as the meanest thing they could possibly say to you. And that creates like this huge disconnect with you and potential new people in your life, or even just improving relationships with people that you already have in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people don't really have the language to talk about like mental health and in particular about shame. And because they don't have that language, they automatically become a little like defensive, and it triggers, like, I think shame is a really triggering topic, and it can kind of make people react really strongly negatively of like, well, why would you feel that way? And it's because like, you know how negative and uncomfortable and unpleasant the experience of shame is. And so the fact that I'm like bringing that to the conversation or bringing that up, you're having a super strong negative reaction to. But if we kind of are like, this is a safe space, we can process this and nothing bad is going to happen.
Yeah.
It can become a lot more productive. Like, I think that I've had really similar experiences with like certain family members where I've tried to talk about like more negative aspects of my mental health, and they've been kind of a similar thing of like a really strong, like, well, that's weird. That's weak.
Yeah.
Like, why would you?
Yeah.
And like attributing it to other negative things.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it too is like a lot of mental health stuff is highly genetic. And a lot of our parents and our aunts and our uncles and our grandparents have had those experiences. And so it is one of those topics that people don't have the language for, but that they do have really strong emotional experiences around. And the like disparity between those two things can cause certain people to react super negatively. And that's kind of always what I try and remind myself, because people are shitty.
Yeah, like my uncle and my grandma are for sure autistic. For fucking sure. And but they also like don't believe in that at all.
Yeah.
So like my grandma like doesn't believe in OCD, but also has like this ridiculous drive to be organized in ways that come across extremely disorganized, and like like it's chaotic constantly, but she knows what the fuck's going on in her head most of the time, and like it by like having that conversation about potentially having OCD or potentially being autistic towards her or my uncle or my cousin or like anybody, that would be such an impossible conversation because she would take that as me trying to like insult somebody. Like, how dare you say this about somebody?
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
Oh, I didn't have anything specific to say about that.
Just a breath. Just a breath.
Yeah.
You're all good. I guess the thing that like I guess kind of keeps coming up for me is just the idea that like shame is like a barrier to vulnerability.
Very much
Absolutely.
so.
Where it's like I feel like vulnerability is like the thing that allows you to connect, and shame is the thing that makes you feel disconnected. And
And shame is a very systemic thing too. I
Yeah.
think that what you were saying earlier about shame being like a system of control is very true. And I think that especially when you're experiencing shame and you're occupying like any kind of identity that's really scrutinized by like external people, you're consistently questioned about that. And so you're consistently having to justify yourself to other people.
Yeah.
And a lot of deconstructing shame is realizing that you've probably adopted behaviors or attitudes or beliefs that are purely to not experience shame worse, right? A lot of deconstructing shame, I think, is realizing that you've been rewarded for like socially normal behavior and that might not actually be behavior that serves you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think like being able to just like separate the two, you know what I mean, is like separating like, is this something that like I in essence want to do, or is this something that and like I'm not allowed to do because society says I can't, or is it like, is this something society says not to and is like something that I shouldn't do? You know,
is this something I'm doing to avoid shame or something that I'm doing to serve myself?
Exactly.
I think it's interesting how you said that like vulnerability and shame are kind of like on the opposite ends of the spectrum.
Antithesis of each other.
Yeah, but I also think that like they like for me like something that's interesting about being neurodivergent for me is like that I am sometimes incredibly authentic to the point where like I can't really plan how I want to come across to other people.
Yeah.
Right.
And then that level of vulnerability, it can lead to shame because if I'm around people that don't like appreciate that about me, then I can feel like there's something wrong with me. Like, why am I oversharing? Why am I, comfortable talking about these things or whatever, So I think it's interesting how it can cause, being vulnerable, but that's because of these outside ideas of like what being normal is or what being socially appropriate is, So, because I've learned that like people either love the fact that I'm really authentic or find it really offensive to like honestly, probably they're masking, like, because I think people mask even who aren't neurodivergent, right? Like, I think for lots of different reasons, like we were talking about, like all sorts of aspects of our identity. So I just think I've had this feeling before where people were like how, like, I can't believe you said that, and I'm like, what? I'm just like, that's true. I wasn't like, you know what I mean? Like I wasn't, and they're just like, we don't talk about that kind of vibe.
Right.
And I'm like, and then I felt so much shame.
Yeah. Well,
like so much. But then other people were like, fuck yeah, speak your truth, and then it's such an alternative like validation versus like feeling so shut down.
Rejected.
A lot of, I think, overcoming shame is finding those groups of people that really want to embrace that. Because I think that there are like certain cultural practices, certain groups of people that being really authentic is more rewarded socially. Like for me personally, doing comedy has been a really, really big thing of like being really authentic on stage, being embarrassing to yourself on stage. Because like we're all inherently embarrassing. Being alive is cringe. I think that like when you are in places that reward you for oversharing and for being vulnerable, that is kind of how you start to process shame like in your everyday life. And I think that those spaces for different people are definitely different, but like ones that really encourage creativity in particular have always been the ones I've gravitated towards.
Well, I mean, it's a big part of the reason why, I have this podcast is because it's just like, I want to give people that opportunity to just be vulnerable. You know what I mean? Because it's like oftentimes, especially with comedians, is it's like, you don't get to say it if it doesn't have a punchline. You know what I mean? And you can't say it if it doesn't have a punchline. People be fucking annoyed, but like, it should probably be funny. So it's just like giving people the opportunity to like feel like they're not being judged. Because it's like, I feel like oftentimes like we shut down because we feel like we're saying too much, we're being judged, or we're not being understood. You know, and it's like those are reasons that like I've noticed that like people will hold back, but it's like if you can make somebody feel safe to say like you're not sharing too much information, I'm not judging you, and I do understand like why you may have interacted with whatever situation in whatever way, like that allows people to like not feel shame and to feel like you're a safe person to open up to.
Yeah, for sure.
So, all right, cool. Well, we're going to take a real quick break and we will be right back with the smoke break. And welcome back to the Smoke Break. I'm your host, your old pal Zane, here with Zoe Schwartz.
Hello.
Daisy Claire.
Hi.
And Taylor Barrett.
Hello.
All right. On this last section of the smoke break, we are going to talk about
Identity.
Absolutely. I love my co-hosts. They just know. I'm like, what were we? Identity.
Sandwiches.
Yeah.
Yeah, identity. So yeah, tell me a little bit like how you feel like this plays into like some of the other topics you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me personally, realizing in my early 20s like the extent to which I was masking myself from other people, and then simultaneously like processing that shame and like kind of still continuing to do that.
Sure.
Has been like a long process, and it kind of leaves you with this question of like, who am I as a person? Like, I've had all of these like pretty strong ideas of who I am or who I'm supposed to be.
Sure.
Kind of imposed on me from other people. And like, now that I'm an adult, like I'm paying my own bills. I'm not under anybody else's roof. I can make my own decisions in life, but that freedom is kind of scary. Like, especially when you're continuing to deconstruct shame, because you realize how many cultural messages have kind of just been given to you that's the expectation.
Yeah.
And then you start taking apart all of those and you're like, oh, I can be the person I want to be regardless. And I can kind of like piece together my identity from the things that actually make me feel good and affirmed and like bring me joy.
Yeah.
And the process of doing that is just like, I think a really interesting thing to talk about in relation to masking.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, and I think that like trying to like pull different parts of things away from something and figure out the parts that like you do identify with and that like are a part of you is like, it's very, I don't know. It's kind of eye-opening, you know, to like look at the things that you're like, I did this or I didn't do this because of, you know, like whatever I thought everybody else thought about it, you know, and it's like trying to find those things. Like, you know, I haven't exactly talked about it a lot, but like I came out as non-binary recently, right? And it's like there were a lot of things that like I was doing or wouldn't do because it was perceived as masculine, you know? And it's like there were things that I was like, no, you can't do that because like this you have to be this way, you know? And it was like my identity as a black male was like, you have to be tough, you have to be cool, you have to be like the media's portrayal of
fucking Luke Cage or something.
Luke Cage, absolutely busting through fucking walls, you know what I mean? But it's just like that idea that I needed to be tough, that I need to be a protector, like all these things that like were imposed on me that like I felt like I had to fit that mold, and I felt like if I didn't fit that mold I wasn't lovable, and if I wasn't lovable then I was going to be alone, and that's like one of our greatest fears is like I can't survive in society if I'm alone. But I think like being able to like strip away the parts, the thing is like the parts that I'm keeping and the parts that I'm pulling away, it's like I don't want to be accepted for the person I was while I was masking. I don't want to be accepted for the person who I was when I was trying to avoid shame. I want to be the person who's accepted my own shame and like is inviting people in who are also, you know, welcoming of all parts of me.
I think like the process of unmasking for me felt a lot like chiseling granite, you know, like I knew there was something underneath all this bullshit, but I just like kind of had to like work through chunks to like get there. Yeah. And a large part of it was like acknowledging that I had been masking for a long time, because it didn't feel like I was. It felt like I was like surviving, and I didn't realize that part of what I considered surviving was masking to survive. And that was like the way that I saw myself was not the way that probably other people saw me, because I saw what I actually wanted to be and what I was comfortable being with, or being within my identity. But I had to realize that there was like a whole layer that I was presenting for the sake of survival that I wanted to like then strip away and just kind of like be the person that I saw myself as for a long time. And that was like letting go of a lot of anger. That was letting go of a lot of like just like imposed ideals that I kind of clung on to like fit in or to survive or to like appease frustrated family members or whatever. And like now being willing to not fit that and being willing to like rock the boat a little bit because I don't give a fuck about that boat, you know?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I just had an epiphany. I think I realized, because this whole time I was like, what do I do to mask? I don't feel like I'm even capable of masking, and I'm sure I do. But then I thought like this is kind of like not totally focused on the ADHD thing, but I realized that like the whole idea of like dieting for me was like totally like masking. You know what I mean?
100%.
And it makes sense too, because I've heard that a lot of like eating disorders are common with people that are neurodivergent sometimes, because we need something to like put all these feelings on of like what's wrong with me, right? So it's like, and I think that's just
Sense of
women.
control.
Yeah, people socialize as women too a lot of the time. I mean, everybody I think has body issues, but specifically in our culture, like.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just thought about that, like, and the choice to stop doing that, and the choice to like try to accept myself the way that I am. It has been part of like, yeah. And so when people are like, oh, well, you can still change your body if you want to, you know, and I'm like, yeah, at the sacrifice of being who I am, you know what I mean? And so that's really like something I just had an epiphany. Like that was me accepting my true identity, which is like, I'm not naturally a thin person. If I want to be thin, I have to be on a diet for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And that shit took all my fucking energy. And I had no personality. I was like fit girl, you know, and like it was just so boring and lame, but there was so much like social capital involved in that.
Yeah, well, and I think that is really the part of like deconstructing shame and like kind of realizing what aspects of your identity are like really ringing true for you and bringing you happiness is like recognizing that there's an incredible amount of social capital in engaging in certain types of practices. And that's not for like no reason. Like there's actual history there of like the government has incentivized certain types of social behavior in human beings for like centuries, for millennia. And the way that we have chosen to do it in our culture in particular is really damaging to people developing their own sense of self. Like we live in a culture where non-monogamy is straight up not accepted. Bigamy is illegal in all 50 states. You can't marry more than one person legally.
Right.
And there's a lot of stuff that comes with being in a nuclear family. You get tax benefits. You get increased protection from a lot of like government programs.
Right.
You get a lot of benefit to engaging in certain types of socially normal behavior. I think that for me personally, realizing that I was trying to capitalize on as many social things as I could in order to like seem normal was a big part of like recognizing my true identity. Like I remember downplaying my queerness in particular for years. Like I started identifying as bi when I was 13 because I was like, I know girls are amazing, duh. But it took me a long time to start like embracing that and like bringing it up to people and being more visibly queer and like doing queer flagging and getting more involved in queer culture because I was like, I'm already autistic. I'm already weird in other ways.
Yeah.
And I want to try and capitalize on being normal in all of the other ways as much as possible.
Marginalize yourself.
But the thing is that like, first of all, that really feeds into shame. It's not going to bring you personally happiness. And there are also like actual social damages to doing that. Like you're kind of upholding systems that are unhealthy, both for yourself and just for everyone else. Like I'm a big believer that our behaviors impact other people, even like regardless of whether or not they're personal decisions. And what that means is that like you need to be doing what's good for you, what brings you happiness, that reflects positively to your like community as well. Like engaging in really harsh diet culture when you have a kid and they're watching you do that impacts them. Like that was definitely a big thing in my family.
Me too. Yeah, no, yeah. And even just like, I don't know, even just like your friends, like people talking about, it's just like, it has such a, once you unpack it, then like every time you hear it, you're just like, oh, that's so diet culture, you know, or whatever. Yeah. And it just really, and I think also like when I was super into it, I've had people tell me like, yeah, you made me feel shitty about myself because I was so focused on talking about like my exercise and what I was eating. And it was like, and it really was like, I feel better then in some ways. And like, it took me a while to unpack that, but it did. It was like, I was feeling self-righteous because I was doing this thing that made me more virtuous than everyone, which is I lost 100 pounds. Like, look at me, you know what I mean? But then it also, the way people treated me super reinforced the idea that like, you're not okay who you are. And then of course it's literally that it did that to my the friends around me. And it was actually really, I was really like touched when my friend told me that, because I was like, thank you, you're right. Like that just even more reinforces why I've made this decision to, you know, but it's not easy. That's the other thing too, is when you choose to let go of that, you're letting go of social capital and you're agreeing to experiencing certain amounts of oppression, really, like depending on the identity, it's obviously totally different levels of it.
Right.
But like, so like that's another thing, is that you're losing something by giving that up, but then you're also gaining authenticity and an authentic relationship with yourself. So it's a trade-off.
And other people too, because it's like they're the person that you're allowing them to accept is like you're authentic you know, like I think so much about like creating this like fucking avatar of like, I'm a good person and I'm perfect and I always have been, is like we create this fucking thing, and then when it crumbles we're just like, oh shit, you know, now what? You know, like
who am I
everything was hinged on this being perfect.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah. And you can't, nothing, your value cannot be hinged on anything. Like we are all inherently valuable and deserving of love and respect, regardless of what we achieve in our lives or what we adhere to, you know?
And then like what you do after acknowledging that, I feel like is how you kind of like pursue your own identity.
Exactly.
Once you realize like, I don't need to do these things to have like self-worth and to have self-love and to be a part of a community. Like now what do you do? That's your identity.
Yeah.
Like that.
Well, that's when I started pursuing comedy like more because I was like, I have energy for this now because comedy takes a lot of energy.
It does.
Dieting,
on a lot.
Yeah. And dieting, I didn't have time. I had to go to the gym. I had to like prep my meals and count my calories. It's so boring.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is as you like embrace aspects of your identity that actually bring you happiness, there is that thing of like you're letting go of a lot of social capital, but you're also gaining a lot back.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you're gaining your time back. You're also gaining security in the relationships that you have because you know that they're not like around you just because you're like skinny or attractive or like acting normally or like whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And I also think that the thing that's important is like, I think it can be really hard not to beat yourself up about like masking certain parts of your identity.
Sure.
And I really think the way that you get over that is by being like, it's like, there's a reason why I decided to do this for this long.
Yeah.
It's because certain types of things are socially rewarded. Why are they socially rewarded? But most importantly, how can we make sure that it doesn't continue to be like this?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of things is like recognizing the specific areas in which you've been made to feel inadequate and doing things to like reinforce that other people don't feel inadequate in those ways.
Absolutely.
So like if you've struggled a lot with body image, like there are a lot of like youth organizations that really look for like mentors and stuff like that. If you've struggled a lot with like substance use or mental health, there are a ton of resources like in Portland. There are just like a lot of opportunities to connect with other people who've shared the same specific thing that you felt shame about. And I think that being in community with those people, really helps you to find your identity, like find your community, but also prevents the shame from continuing to come back because our culture is kind of built on this idea that you should continually feel shame. Yeah. And so I've definitely had the thing where I've like processed shame and I'm like, I'm good to be vulnerable again. And then I have like one bad experience and I'm like, all of that work, what did it get me?
Back to zero.
Yeah, back to zero. And it's not back to zero. You've still learned a lot. But like it's this idea of also recognizing and kind of accepting this fucked up reality that like, it's kind of, we're designed to fail when it comes to not feeling shame. And the way that you participate against that is like in an active fight against the systems that cause you to feel shame.
And what's made that concept easier for me, especially after like realizing my levels of like neurodivergency, was that like the shame that I was feeling came from a source that I strongly disagree with.
Yes.
So like the thing that's trying to make me feel bad fucking sucks. So fuck that and fuck the shame. And it's not that black and white. It's not that easy to just be like, well, I don't want to feel the shame, but it, like that it helps me crawl out of the hole a little bit. You know, it gives me a ladder. I still have to do the fucking work, but it allows me to like process that in a way that like I don't put as much value or weight on the shame that I'm experiencing because I don't like where it came from.
Yeah, I tell people that like getting angry is like a really important aspect of this because I feel like you're gonna, like you said, you're gonna be reintroduced to this like ideals and these oppressive ideas of what you're supposed to be every day because they are our culture. And so in order to like be able to fight it, you have to think that way. Like you have to actively be every day reminding yourself why you've chosen this path. And part of that is being angry that the system hurt you in that way. And like that's the fuel that keeps me going because I still think about that shit all the time. It's still it's not like I don't always feel great about my body or whatever, you know what I mean? It's just that I'm mad enough that I felt that I had to feel that way about myself that I'm not going to go back that direction. Like I'm going to keep fighting because that anger and that it keeps you, fuels the flame or the whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, definitely.
Anger is the part of you that loves you the most and wants to protect you.
Yeah, it's a protective, especially when it comes to like oppressive systems. I think anger is a really appropriate reaction.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think that like anger just being like a tool to create change.
It's an activating emotion.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that a big thing about certain like active versus passive emotions is that active emotions like anger are only as good as the practice that you like integrate with them.
Absolutely.
Because like anger also has the potential to be a really destructive
Totally.
force.
Yeah, for sure.
But the thing that's cool about like active emotions is that if you develop a good system to be able to process them, it can be like it can help you to process the feeling of anger in a way where you have like tangible and material results.
Solutions.
Whereas like with like passive emotions, like being depressed, when you process that, you're not really able to do much. And if you're trying to do a lot while you're like depressed and burnt out, it can lead to a lot bigger issues.
Yeah.
But like that's the cool thing about recognizing that shame is a systemic emotion that is very closely tied to anger and then to fear, which is another active emotion. And so it is interesting. Like shame is a substitute for activation. It is a passive way to experience activating emotions.
Okay.
And that's why the system kind of rewards it, is because it's like you're not doing anything with these.
It transmutes the
activating
energy.
things.
Yeah. And then people are easier to control if they internalize instead of externalize.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Well, excellent, Daisy. Thank you so much for joining
Thank
us.
Thank you. Yes.
Absolutely. It's been a treat. All right. Well, this has been The Smoke Break. I'm your host, Joe Pal Zane. Here with Zoe Schwartz.
Bye.
Daisy Claire.
Hi.
And Taylor Barrett.
Bye.
Later, players.
Later.